right. Welcome to the Brevard Christian Church podcast. It is good to be back with my preaching friends here, and even better, I was going to say even gooder, but I guess I
even
say
more gooderist, I think.
It's even better to be talking about the Bible and to know that you can trust it. Why? Well, many reasons, but we can trust this book because we discussed how unified it is in a supernatural way, how it just lines up time and time again. And we've been going down this list of reasons as to why you can believe, why you can trust that the Bible is accurate. It claims that about itself. So that's another reason. So we're not just using, something that we've made up. This is something that the Bible claims for itself. But then we've been talking about fulfilled prophecy. And I want to encourage people, because we only had a chance to discuss two passages, Psalm chapter 22 and Ezekiel around chapter 28. Just two of the prophecies fulfilled in one of them was fulfilled in Jesus, and the other was fulfilled in future events as to what actually happened.
That was Ezekiel 26, by the way.
Ezekiel 26.
You were the one who jumped to chapter 28.
I am so sorry. I jumped to chapter 28. Well, maybe it's providential that I can't turn to the right page. So Ezekiel 26. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
But there are dozens of these, and
yes,
you can do some research and find a list of these. I would encourage you to do that. Just keep in mind, be careful. Just like with any piece of literature, people can take license, and sometimes they will make claims. I heard someone one time talking about, the Twin Towers, that's in the Bible. It prophesied that they were going to be, on 9/11, they were going to be taken down. And they used this passage. It's like, no, that's just poetic language and reading into it. But there are some other things that I hope you've seen just from our Ezekiel and our Psalms, that this is not just some artificial, arbitrary reading of the passage. This is clearly stated. Even in the midst of poetic language, it's pretty plain that these kinds of things are going to happen, and in all these different action points they do. But there's more. I mean, you can go to the book of Micah, and we can talk about where Jesus was going to be born. Now, how on earth do you figure out before you're born, how can there be a prophecy saying exactly where you're going to be born, and people read it ahead of time and know where Jesus was born, So you've got all these lists of different things that are fulfilled in Jesus. And last time I read the book of Matthew, it was pretty clear time and time again to spell out, by the way, in case you're wondering, this is a fulfillment of a prophecy. So if you read just the Gospel of Matthew for starters, then you can look at the prophecies fulfilled. Check your footnotes in your Bible, and it'll probably have a reference to the Old Testament prophecy. You can go back and research that. You can even get online and figure out how old are the copies that we have of that manuscript and when was that book written. And you'll see, man, the Bible has got tons of it.
Yes.
So that's what we got to say on fulfilled prophecy. But there's something huge that we're going to discuss today, right?
Kind of. This is so big. Yeah.
So big.
This is so big that I really don't think we have to go in great depth with this. But if you guys want to, we can go as deep as you want.
But it's a huge item, maybe not a huge discussion.
Right. And the reason I defer is people who want to read books and dig deep themselves. This is a topic that is probably going to be put out there more than any other topic, and that's the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. It is a point, and it's kind of like, I always like to picture this as taking a pyramid and turning it upside down so it rests on one point. This is kind of the point. In fact, Jesus did this, didn't he? When they asked for a sign, and he said, this perverse, crooked generation is not going to receive a sign, which I find that so interesting, because didn't Jesus give them a bunch of signs? With all of his miracles and everything. But anyway, back to point, he said,
here's the ultimate sign.
Yeah, the ultimate sign, the kind of sign you're asking for. You're not going to get it except one. And it's going to be the sign of Jonah. Like Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth. Okay, so it's the point of the resurrection. I'm going to die, be buried, and then come back to life. So Jesus, in a sense, rested his entire ministry, all of his claims on this one event. And Christianity really rests on this one event. If Jesus didn't conquer the grave, if he didn't come back to life, like 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the first few verses.
Paul makes
this
that clear,
is
right?
of first importance. Yeah,
What
we
are
are
we
of all
doing
people
here?
most to be pitied if this didn't happen, right?
Why are we doing
yeah.
this podcast if Jesus didn't rise
Right,
from the dead?
right.
It's
This is
pointless.
the point.
So this is huge.
So there have been people, and let me just throw a couple of them out because I think they're going to be familiar to most folks. Lee Strobel's the name that comes to mind first. And of course, I don't want to endorse everything Lee Strobel says, but Lee Strobel, if you know his story, he was an investigative reporter in Chicago. And he thought he would do the world a favor by turning his attention to the claims for Christianity. And he quickly figured out that if he could disprove the resurrection of Jesus, he would undercut Christianity. And that's what he really wanted to do.
Yeah.
He wanted to disprove it. So it's easy in a sense because there's just one thing. You can disprove this one thing. And it's the kind of thing where most secular people are going to say, well, yeah, I can disprove that somebody rose from the dead. I mean,
Sure.
that's,
Yeah.
right? So it's easy. Well, it wasn't easy. In fact, the more Lee Strobel did his investigation, and the reason, again, I mentioned his name, he was an investigative reporter. He's a good writer. He's easy to read. So very engaging. You can read The Case for Faith, The Case for Christ, Case for the Creator. He's written a series of books, but it all started with him trying to disprove Christianity by focusing on the resurrection. And in the process, the more he looked, the more information he found, the more he convinced himself, he became a Christian in the process of this. Well, he's not unlike people before him like Josh McDowell, which I think it's worth mentioning Josh McDowell because he was a college professor. He's not just a reporter. He's a guy who really was academically qualified to look into things, and he did so. He was going to do the world a favor by disproving Christianity, and he ended up writing, his first book was called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And then he wrote several other books thereafter, but that's not quite as easy to read for most people, but it's very good, very good. His son is still...
Fat book.
Yeah, his son's still writing some really good books out there, by the way. But there are several people who've done this same thing. Anyway, it's investigating the resurrection, and here's the way we approach this. It's called, or this is the way I was taught. I was taught that you're supposed to use the sufficient cause principle. Okay, what is the sufficient cause principle and why should you use it? Even if you don't know you're using the sufficient cause principle, people do it all the time, and it's a very reasonable way to approach anything. Sufficient cause principle is what your doctor uses when you come to him and you say you've got a problem. It's what your mechanic uses when you say, hey, my car's making this noise. It's what detectives use when they come to a crime scene. Sufficient cause principle is simply this. I'm going to look at what I can see, what I've got evidence of right in front of my face, and I'm going to ask this question. What caused this?
Yeah, what happened?
Right? Okay.
Step one.
So, Mike, you come in, you've been hacking, and you you look like you've got a virus,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't joke
What
about
would
things
have
like that.
caused such a
Right.
thing? Well, I think of the one with the kids, and there's writing all over the wall, lipstick everywhere, lipstick on the kid's hair and face, and you walk in the door and you see this kid staring at you like, uh-oh.
Yeah, and he's got lipstick not only on him, he's got the lipstick holder in
In
his hand.
Huh. What caused
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
An
Parents do it all the
alien
time.
came in and wrote these things on the
Yeah.
wall, Dad, honest. Right. Well, good detective does this. My favorite one is a mechanic. You know, you tell the mechanic all these strange things are happening, and the mechanic goes through a process. He knows that it's got to be electrical, mechanical, or fuel related. I mean, so you start the process of elimination, what the person says, what it's not doing, what it's supposed to do, and you just start looking at the obvious until you figure out what the problem is, right? Well, that's what historians do with claims of history. We look at sufficient cause principle. Here's something that we know happened. Give me a reason why it happened. Okay. We know from not just the Bible, which, by the way, we've talked about the credibility of the Bible to this point. It's a very credible historical account. But we know from Roman historians, from Greek historians, and Jewish historians that are not Christian, we know that a man named Jesus lived. We know that this man named Jesus had followers. that ended up changing the world. We know that.
No two ways about it, baby.
We know that he was put to death. And by the way, we know that from Roman accounts, that he was put to death, that he was buried, and that we can't find his body. The tomb's empty.
Right.
Now, from there, people go in wildly different directions. Let's just take that one topic. The tomb is empty. This man named Jesus was put to death, and his tomb's empty. What are the possible reasons for the tomb being empty? Well, his followers could have come and stolen the body and told everybody he rose from the dead.
Right.
Yeah,
Right?
and that even they say happened in the first century. There was
They
some
did.
money
In fact, the
exchanged.
Jewish leaders paid the
For them to
Romans
say
to
that.
tell that tale, right?
Never really
Okay.
caught on, I guess.
Well, there's a good reason why it doesn't catch on. People don't die for what they know to be a lie.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to make up this fanciful tale that didn't really happen, and then somebody's burning you at the stake.
You might need to clarify that. Who's dying here? We're talking about the followers of Jesus.
The followers of
apostles now.
Jesus, the early ones that they claim that they say this is a possibility. Let's say his early followers, his disciples, the apostles, stole his body.
Yeah.
Well, every one of those guys, except one that we know about, died a torturous death. Mark was dragged through the streets by wild horses. We've got examples of, oh boy, Fox's Book of Martyrs tell us so many different things that have happened as far as crucifixions, being thrown to the wild animals, being sawn in two.
That oil one.
The Romans, I tell you, they even bored holes in people's skull and poured molten metals into their head while they were still alive. They did torturous things to people. Now think about this. If you are being burned at the stake or being thrown to the wild animals or whatever, don't you think it would be logical to assume that somebody would have said, oh, we made this up?
Yeah. Never mind.
Yeah.
Even if they didn't,
Even if they didn't.
they still would probably.
And that's the
I don't
point
know.
I really want you to think about here is if you've got dozens of not just the apostles, but if you've got all the early followers, don't you think there'd be at least a record of one or two people say, oh, we made this up, even if they didn't, just to
Yes.
stop the torture?
This is huge because people die for things all the time.
Yes.
But find one person that knowingly knows the thing that they're dying for is a
Yeah.
lie. It's
Yeah.
nothing but a big fake.
If this was a fake, the logical conclusion
And
would
you
be
knew it. You
a
were in the
majority of
position.
these people, or at least some of these people,
Yeah.
under the torture would have come clean. We don't have any record of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No record of that at all.
Just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so that's option number one. Their followers, that just doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense. So option number two, the enemies. What if the Jews or the Romans came along and stole the body and took it someplace else? Well, the question would be why?
Yeah. What motive?
Yeah.
I think of means, motive, and opportunity for a
good.
crime scene. But what
Good.
motive would they have to hide Jesus's body?
Wouldn't they rather say, no, he's right here?
Yeah, if I were them, I'd be like, well, even if I did make the mistake of, oh, we're just going to do something weird and hide his body. Oh, wait, everyone believes he's risen. Okay, here's the body. We found it. Here it is.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't even try to put forward a big scam or something.
Yes.
To try
Oh,
to-
if it was a double cross, like the Romans were working with the Jews, and they said, "We'll make people believe this and give you money on the side."
I told you guys earlier I was listening to a lot of these debates at Oxford and Cambridge and some of these other places because I find it very fascinating to listen to some of these arguments of people who don't believe in God. And one of these guys got a double doctorate degree, doctor's degrees in various fields. His explanation was that there was a hungry bear that came along and found the tomb and pulled the body out.
Whoa, that's new.
Okay, what would you say to a hungry bear coming along and pulling the body out?
So it moved the stone.
It's just
first.
based
Oh,
on
there
that.
you go. There was a stone that the women wanted to know how in the world are we going to move this stone out of the way because it was too big for them
Bears
to
are
move.
pretty
Yeah.
strong, but still, and he left the wrapping behind folded up.
Oh, left the wrappings
You
behind.
know what? Bears
Awful.
are pretty neat, aren't they? I
Yes.
don't know. That's some talent right there.
And there's
to
a
be able
Roman
to-
guard. There's a Roman guard that's supposed to be there guarding the body, and we have no record of anybody mentioning the possibility of a bear
Yeah.
coming along. So this is kind of like pulling out of left field, isn't it?
Well, there's
That's what-
plenty. I've heard the one where people say, "Oh, Jesus didn't really. He fainted in the
Oh,
tomb."
good,
They
good.
call
That's-
it the swoon.
that one's called the
theory.
swoon theory. That's
yeah.
exactly
He just
right.
passed out, but then the coolness of this tomb revived him. Never mind the fact that he got beaten to a point where he should have been dead before he even got to the
flogging
cross.
that took place before the
Then
crucifixion.
when he finally gets to the cross, the experts are killing him. The cross, we invented the word excruciating
Based on that.
Yeah, based on the cross because of the pain you go through. And then after that's done, they stab him in the side just to make sure he bleeds out some more.
Wrap him up with 75 pounds worth of spices.
And then after he manages to revive himself, weasel out of 75 pounds of spices with
Pushes
super
the
strength,
stone out of the
push
way.
the stone
Fights
away,
off the Roman
fights off
guard.
2 guards,
Never seen again.
and then half bloody and beat up and scraped up, goes to his followers and said, "I told you I conquered the grave. I am alive," and convince all of them that he didn't pull.
Yeah.
Well, you forgot
That's-
about the impressive wire work at the end, because then at some point he's got to go up past where they can see.
Oh, that's
right?
true. I don't know how he pulled that one off. To launch up into, but you just ask yourself one thing after the next. What theory accounts for this evidence that we have? All these claims from individuals who had even his own followers, they didn't have a reason to make this claim. It would have been so much better for the apostles to not claim that Jesus came back.
Yes.
Because they wouldn't have been tortured to death.
That's exactly
They would have
right.
gotten to live peaceful lives. They.
And to be totally fair with this, a lot of people, these claims don't add up. Well, a lot of people today would look at it and say, yeah, but the claim that there is a God that would bring people back to life, that doesn't add up either. Well, the reason they would say that has nothing to do with the resurrection. It has to do with the fact that they have excluded the possibility of God before they came to the resurrection.
Yes, that's some.
Yes. Richard Swinburne makes a really important point. I love this. He said, you know what? If a scientist, in looking through a telescope, sees something that looks like a supernova, a star blowing apart, but he believes that stars will never blow apart, when he looks through his telescope and sees that happening, he's going to be saying, oh, that really looks like a supernova. But I know supernovas don't exist.
Yeah.
So he's really going to try to, come up with some other explanation. But if he did his homework before he ever looked through the telescope and realized it's possible for stars to blow up, then when he looks through his telescope and sees all this evidence, he's going to come to the right conclusion. And Swinburne makes this point. You know what? If you look at the evidence and realize that it really does, there really is a lot of evidence that there is a creator, there is a God, then you come to something like this, it's like, hey, you know what? This is a great example.
And just another name to throw out, a modern day name. If you're looking to get deep, to dive deep into the evidence for the resurrection, there's a professor named Gary Habermas that has kind of built up a reputation for being one of the, if not the, expert on the resurrection of Jesus. And he spends so much time researching, but he's working on another book now, I'm told.
Yes. I didn't remember if we mentioned this in the podcast already or not, but he's written over 40 books. Half of them are just on the resurrection. His latest book's on the resurrection, but it's not a compilation of his earlier works. It's what did he say, 75 or 90%? It's a lot of new material, and it's over 4,000 pages. Over 4,000 pages. This is the guy, and I want people to think about this. This is so impressive to me. Instead of using the rational, natural approach at looking at all the evidence, he actually takes the hardest position of all. And what he does is he says, listen, you liberals out there, as far as scriptural evidence is concerned, he said, I won't look at anything you don't want me to look at. He said, you just tell me the historical documents that you say, okay, I admit that really is a good document. He says, you just tell me what you want me to look at. And he says, there are 5 books that they will admit, all of them. It doesn't make any difference what your beliefs are. They all admit that these are reliable first century documents. They go all the way back. And Gary says, okay, that's enough. And he starts with those books, and he builds the case for the resurrection just on that material.
Wow.
Well, I want to say
Powerful
too, like
stuff.
this is something that happens a lot, or I'll see, like you talked about looking at some of the debates and theological debates, and that one is one that I see often, like with somebody that'll say like they're atheists, they just say, well, based on what evidence? But the thing is, it's the definition of evidence. I mean, and there's loads of it for the resurrection.
There is.
So it's
There
not
is.
sometimes you'll hear that, well, there's no evidence. Like, well, actually, no, there's a lot of evidence. And in fact, the evidence is pretty clear, because that's the thing. And you go into it thinking it can't possibly, like you were saying, it's like an a priori assumption.
It is.
No, this can't be the case. I
And
look at what you want, but once I've already made my mind up.
That's the classic point of David Hume, and they still go back to David Hume. David Hume did a classic work against miracles. But if you read it, and I actually had to read it in my graduate studies, when you read David Hume's stuff, Hume's reasoning boils down to this: miracles can't happen. Why? Because they can't happen.
Yeah.
That's basically what he says.
Much more eloquently, but
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. But think about that basic principle. It can't happen. Why can't it happen? Because it can't happen.
Yeah.
If you really adopted that principle consistently, you would have no new scientific discoveries, would you?
yeah.
Because it's like, no, that can't happen. Why? Because we've never seen it happen. Well, then
Yeah.
Nothing new happens. then.
Well, and and there's always, not always, but I do see sometimes there's a conflation between like a belief system and a hard science. Like a science is, objective. What does the evidence point to most clearly?
Yes.
And, that's not, but then when you get things that say science, but the way they're used is more like philosophically, not like evidence-based case
Very true.
making or reasoning.
But even the hard sciences, I love this, and I know I'm speaking out of my field, but I'm an old guy.
We're all scientists here. We know what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm an old guy, and I remember back when the people started talking about quantum physics and stuff years and years ago. But the reason that blew everybody's mind is under the Newtonian system, everything just made perfect sense, and it worked one way, and it has to work this way until, guess what? At a subatomic level, we discovered it doesn't work that way. And now we've got the hard science right in front of us that says our old hard science doesn't work the way we thought it did. You know what I mean? So anyway, I apologize to those of you who know how to express this much better than I do. But back to the evidence of the resurrection. That's just one example, the empty tomb. What you do is you look at all the other points that everybody historically agrees on, and you simply ask this question: how could that have happened? Let's just throw one more real quickly on the table. How can you explain the biggest movement that has ever happened in the history of the world?
Ooh, yeah.
Christianity. I mean, people talk about the growth of Islam and things like that. Yeah. And you go back and you ask yourself, how could that happen? Well, you look at Prophet Muhammad and what he did and how he conquered by the edge of the sword. And you look at that. But you look at Christianity, the impact it's had without the sword. And please, don't let misrepresentation of the Crusades. That's much later, and it's a perversion of what Christianity is supposed to be. Let's look at the pure Christianity when it swept the world, right? With not the edge of the sword, with just this idea that was revolutionary to everybody, and it literally swept the planet. How do you explain that? Well, there was this teacher, and he was pretty good. No,
that doesn't seem to flow. It doesn't seem to flow. And I love this you were talking about today. I don't know if this comes up as one of the other points as far as the universality of Christianity.
Yes.
But I think that is a powerful thing to bring up. Just where do you find localized Christianity throughout history? Because you can localize other religions just fine.
Yes.
When it comes to Christianity, it really has blown up to be a worldwide thing that is just constantly growing, and that's an exciting thing to think about, and all that because of the resurrection.
That's exactly right. Which, by the way, that worldwide nature of that's a fulfillment of prophecy in the book of Daniel, isn't it? About the mountain that grows and covers the entire face of the earth.
I love that one. I remember that.
Boy, I do too.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, the sands of time are running down on this particular moment. I'm just so glad we were able to throw out some names for people to be able to look up if you want, because there is so much. The problem that you're going to find throughout the people that you're talking with and anyone who's skeptical of this, the main problem is it takes a lot of time to dig into the Bible. It's not a quick read. It's not an easy thing. And Jesus himself has made it clear. This is a challenging thing to follow, and it's not easy, but it's very, very rewarding. So when you dig into this book, you really dig into it, you'll find out most most all of the arguments or so-called evidences against it are just based on misunderstandings. They just didn't understand what they were dealing with in the beginning. If you actually look into what the Bible says, then all of a sudden you realize, whoa, there's so much more. And all throughout history, it's going to continue to happen. We're going to find more and more people trying to disprove it. And lo and behold, they're becoming Christians as a result of it. There are many more names we could have listed, but we just didn't even get around to it because we know it's going to keep on happening. So it's an encouraging thing. So anything you guys want to say before we go?
I'm looking at Mike.
It's a lot of info to digest, man. These are some heavy concepts that we're talking about, and they do beg further research. So
good deal.
Yeah.
So I guess we're inviting that, right?
Yeah.
Do your research, please. If you have questions you want to ask, feel free to ask them. That's an important step.
All truth is God's truth.
There we go.
It's only going to get you closer to Him.
All right. Well, I look forward to hearing more about God's truth then next time. Bye, everyone.